We are joined now by Evan Wasch, the NBA Executive Vice President of Basketball Strategy and Analytics. Evan, thanks so much for joining us. All right, so listen, I'm a big fan of the NBA. When I was a little kid, I wanted to be Allen Iverson and Kobe Bryant before I wanted to do anything else with my life. But let's talk about this, because over the past few years, we have, the in-season tournament from last year. Now we have the NBA Cup, which is going to have the semifinals and finals here in Las Vegas, and we're going to get to that a little later on in this interview. But let me start with this synergy we're seeing between the NBA and Las Vegas. How real is this love affair?
I think it's fantastic for basketball. I think obviously we've had for over 20 years now NBA Summer League in Las Vegas and a real summer celebration of the future of the NBA. We've of course had USA Basketball training camp there over a number of cycles, so that the best players on the planet get to perform in the market. And of course, you mentioned G League Ignite and their presence in the market the last couple of years. And now the NBA Cup is really just the next step. And we think what's unique about the NBA Cup is it's the first time that we're seeing competition of consequence, meaning the best teams in the NBA competing at the highest level for a trophy that sort of defines their early season performance. And that's not something we've historically had with USA Basketball or Summer League or Ignite. So we think it's just another unique property to bring basketball to Las Vegas. And I think it just extends that longstanding partnership we've had with the city.
Yeah, and this trend is fascinating because you're a guy who's been a part of the league now for 14 years. I'm old enough to remember when the All-Star game, the NBA All-Star game, came to Las Vegas, which was a big step in that direction. Former Commissioner David Stern, it was a notorious notion that he did not love Las Vegas and any cohesiveness between the NBA and Las Vegas. But now Adam Silver has made a lot of steps in this new direction. You're a guy, you've been a part of the NBA for 14 years and counting. You started as an intern, so you know really what this growth has transformed and looked like. And amongst Vegas locals here, there's so much hope that we're going to have potentially an NBA franchise coming up the pike. So this is an exciting time for Las Vegas locals. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself personally, what you've seen with this growth and this relationship, and what do you think that means for Las Vegas locals?
Yeah, so the All-Star game predates me. I've certainly been to the last 14, but was not at the Las Vegas one. But I just, again, I think it's a fantastic market for sports. You're seeing that with teams in other leagues, starting to call Vegas home. Of course, we have a WNBA team very successful in Las Vegas. And of course, it's something that's on the table as we look towards future expansion. And Adam's talked about our priorities as we got through our CBA negotiations, as we completed our media deal, that we would turn our attention to potential expansion. And certainly Vegas would be one of the places that we could look at. But I just think expansion team or not, the ability again to bring our game, our competition, our players to Las Vegas and put on the shows that we can put on for that market, both the local fans and the global fans visiting, is just a really special opportunity for us at the NBA.
Of course, last year I was doing a lot of the on-the-ground coverage for the NBA in-season tournament, but now we've transitioned to a new name this year. It's going to be called the Emirates NBA Cup. Let's talk, before we get into the details, just from a naming perspective, why NBA Cup? What's the change there, and why so?
Yeah, so the reason we ended up with the in-season tournament last year was we felt like when we were creating something new, there was actually a lot of value in the literalism of calling it the in-season tournament, because that's exactly what it was, a tournament in the season. And it wasn't the catchiest name. It wasn't meant to sort of build marketing cachet, but just to let fans, media, players, teams know exactly what we were doing, right? We were adding the secondary championship that would sit within the season. It was incredibly successful. It drove outsized fan interest. The performance of teams and players in those games was incredibly intense and competitive. We saw great viewership, social engagement. All the metrics we tracked really went off the charts for those early season games, and it was just a great success story in year one. And not surprisingly, that attracted a lot of interest in the partnership marketplace. And so we'd already been having conversations with Emirates about a broad global partnership with the NBA, and it sort of became clear to them and us following that first iteration of the cup that this would be a great opportunity as a real anchor property for that global partnership. And so we were thrilled to bring them on board. And of course, as part of that, it made sense for us to go through a rebranding. And Emirates has familiarity with cup sponsorships around the world, including the Emirates FA Cup in the UK. And so we thought it made sense, along with that, to rebrand now to the much more pithy Emirates NBA Cup, which is what we'll use going forward. But obviously, hope to see that same intensity independent of the name, and looking forward to the future growth as well.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating how the NBA is growing. This growth that we're witnessing, it's fascinating how you guys are challenging a lot of the norms of old. We're, old NBA fans like me, we're accustomed to, the playoffs, the Larry O'Brien trophy for the team that wins the NBA finals, and a lot of these, old traditional things that we love. It's all good stuff. But now there's the implementation of so many new concepts, and the NBA Cup is one of them. Maybe perhaps you could shed a little light and tell us, from behind the scenes, the conversations that were happening. How did this even come about, the NBA Cup? How did we start moving in this direction where these conversations that were happening in back rooms have now come into existence, and we're seeing and interacting with brand new elements and ideas that the NBA is presenting to us?
Yeah, so if you look back, over the past 10 years, as you alluded to, this has been part of the conversation. I think the first concepts of in season, or what were then called mid-season tournaments, really date back to, 2009, 2010 at the league. There were media members talking about the possibility. And the reality is this wasn't a new concept within sport. It may be new among the US major professional sports leagues, but if you look at the global sports landscape, whether it's international soccer, international basketball, even individual sports here in the US, tennis, golf, racing, fighting, college basketball, all of these sports properties have multiple trophies, multiple championships that teams, players, or athletes can chase in any given calendar year. So the notion of playing a long regular season, a long playoffs, and awarding one trophy at the end of it is actually a pretty unique notion to the American Big Four sports. And we thought that that presented an opportunity to really tap into what we had seen as a great success story elsewhere in the world when it comes to sports, and say, you know what, there doesn't just have to be one trophy to win each year for one team. There can be multiple championships. There can be multiple opportunities for players, teams to put their stamp on the season, to build their legacy, and ultimately to create narrative around, what of course is a fairly long season. And so that was the original concept. And as you said, part of it was becoming more open to innovation around season structure, right? There's generally a little bit more traditionalism in sport. And I think what we did during the COVID season, the creation of the bubble, the seeding games, the way we did that playoff bracket, coming out of the COVID season into the first post-COVID season where we had a play-in tournament for the first time, it really showed people that you can innovate the competition in the NBA and actually get some improved outcomes as a result, right? More competition at the end of the season for seeding in the play-in, more competition throughout the regular season. And that really opened people's eyes a little bit more to the concept of an in-season tournament. And that's ultimately what got us across the finish line, is to say, you know what, this is worth trying. This is something we think we can build for the future that ultimately just makes for better basketball for our players, teams, and fans.
All right, so now, listen, I'm an NBA junkie. I love basketball, but I think a helpful thing to do for our audience right now, if you could just kind of explain what the NBA Cup is, how it functions, and how we can interact with this as a fan, because there's a lot of interesting components, from a prize pool element, all these different things at play. So maybe you could shed a little bit of light on just, explaining how the NBA Cup works, so all of our fans at home really have a good understanding of what the NBA Cup is.
Sure. So it's behind me here on my background, but we've got all 30 teams competing in the cup. They're put into groups of 5. Each team plays each other team in its group once during what we call the group play portion of the tournament. And then the teams with the best records in each of those groups are declared the group winners, and they advance to the knockout rounds along with one wildcard team per conference. So that's 3 group winners and a wild card, 4 teams per conference, 8 teams total. And then they just play a knockout tournament. We have quarterfinals in home markets, 2 in the East, 2 in the West. And then the 4 winners of those games, they come to Vegas. And that's where we play our version of a Final Four, with a semifinal doubleheader on Saturday, December 14th, and then the championship game on Tuesday night, December 17th. And the winners crown the champion and awarded the NBA Cup. There's an MVP, there's an all-tournament team, and there's cash prizing for players. So the players on the championship team get over $500,000 each. Players on the runner-up, $250,000. And then it scales down from that all the knockout teams earn some prizing. So there's incremental benefit to players from advancing throughout the cup. And it's really just, again, heightened the competition in the early part of our season.
And it has no bearing on playoff consideration or any of that kind of stuff?
The outcome of the cup does not, but the games themselves count as regular season games. So the group play games, the 4 games teams play, as well as the quarters and the semifinals, those are regular season games and count towards teams' standings and player statistics. The one game that sits outside of our regular season context is that championship game.
All right, I want to pose to you an analogy, just a fascinating thing that I'm ruminating on. So here's the analogy. So, let's just say you and I own a burger shop. Okay, now this is a burger shop that it's nostalgic. We grew up going there with our parents, our grandparents. It's got this sentimental value to us, this burger shop. And the older we get, we keep going to this burger shop and we love it. But we all know in order for this burger shop to survive, it's got to innovate. It's got to change with the times. It might have to bring about new ideas. So in making those innovations, sometimes that goes against the charm of that nostalgia that you remember about the burger shop. And sometimes the way that that burger shop has to evolve, it could change the idea in our mind of how we remember this burger shop. And listen, you're a smart dude. You went to MIT Sloan, Northwestern. You're one of the greatest sports business minds that we have in any sports industry right now. And I'm assuming you grew up as a basketball and NBA fan, and I'm assuming you want to keep that sentimental charm that you grew up loving. We remember, Jordan in the 90s and the 80s and Bird and Magic and all these great moments and touchstones that we have about the NBA and how we remember it. So are these conscious conversations you guys are having from an NBA perspective? How do you grow and evolve and implement new ideas, but at the same time, have a happy medium and keep that nostalgic charm and the way in which we remember the NBA? How do you keep both of those things going at the same time?
Look, I think the game in part evolves on its own, right? If you picture 80s basketball, the Lakers, Showtime, Magic, you picture 90s basketball with, Jordan, Olajuwon, you picture the 2000s with the Spurs dynasties, the Shaq Kobe era in the early 2000s. Like the game changes over time, in part because of the creativity of our teams and players. And I think our role at the league office is to just make sure that the structures, the policies, and the rules of the game keep it fresh and exciting for players, teams, and fans. And so if that means we have to tweak rules based on what we're seeing on the court, like our transition take foul rule, our non-basketball rule, like teams and players got really smart about how to exploit certain aspects of the rule book in ways that frankly were not very attractive from an aesthetic perspective for our fans. And so we have to adjust to that. The same is true for the structure of our season. If we think of better ways to schedule the games, better ways to create that intense competition, it ultimately benefits everyone in the basketball ecosystem. And so it's incumbent upon us to work with our players, work with our teams, work with our business partners to think about and implement those innovations that ultimately make for a better product for the global basketball fan.
All right, well, we love it. The NBA Cup is going to be going down right here in Las Vegas at T-Mobile Arena. We got the semifinals happening on Saturday, December 14th, and then on Tuesday, December 17th, that's when the championship is going to go down for the NBA Cup. Evan, we thank you so much for your time. Real quickly, before we let you go, any last words that you want to say to our audience?
Just excited for year 2 of the Cup and hopeful for some great competition for the fans in Vegas.
Okay, real quickly, last thing, I lied. I got to ask you one more thing because I do my research. I saw you grew up on a horse farm. Was this like a Hoosiers situation? Did you grow up shooting your first basketball shot against, your first shot, was it against like a barn that your dad recreated as a backboard? Or how did this work? I'm imagining a Hoosiers type of situation.
It had nothing to do with horses, but we had a gravel driveway. So it certainly made dribbling very difficult. So I worked much more on my shot than my handle. And that probably did not help me in later years as a basketball player.
All right, Evan, thank you so much. Again, one of the greatest sports business minds we have on the face of the earth. We thank you so much for giving us a little bit of your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.